From Washington, D.C., this is the Muslim News. Assalamu alaikum, I'm Hena Zuberi. Our top story tonight is on the Guantanamo Bay prison. United States Senator Dick Durbin is calling for an end to the indefinite detention of prisoners in Guantanamo Bay. The Illinois senator called for the move in a letter to Attorney General Merrick Garland yesterday. Durbin urged Garland to reconsider the Department of Justice holding 40 terrorism suspects without due process. He said holding prisoners indefinitely without charge or trial at Guantanamo is a moral stain on America's core values. Guantanamo Bay is a U.S. military prison in Cuba that was established in 2002 by former President George W. Bush. Human rights watchdog Amnesty International considers the camp to be a major breach of human rights due to its use of indefinite detention and torture. It also violates the Due Process Clause of the 5th and 14th Amendments of the United States Constitution. The Israeli army has demolished the home of an American citizen and her children. Sana Shalabi and her 7 children are all citizens of the United States. She did not commit a crime. However, her estranged husband, Montasser, is accused of fatally shooting a Jewish settler in the occupied West Bank. So far, he has not been convicted of any crime. Shalabi was not in any way involved in the killing and didn't know anything about the attack, according to an Israeli human rights organization. A spokesperson said that the U.S. Embassy is following reports of the demolition. Israel reserved the practice of destroying homes only to Palestinian houses, never Jewish ones. Approximately 200 Palestinians protested the demolition of Shalabi's home by hurling rocks and shouting slogans at the military as they tore the house down. Israel demolished 729 Palestinian buildings in 2020. Since the occupation, Israel has demolished 50,261 Palestinian buildings. Bloomberg's news reports that Russian group APT-29 successfully hacked Sinex, a technology provider to the Republican National Committee. The RNC acknowledged Sinex's breach, but it claims that its data has not been accessed by the hackers. The APT-29 group is also known as Cozy Bear. It's responsible for a similar hack of the Democratic National Committee before last year's U.S. presidential elections. The group is also believed to be behind the coordinated attack on several U.S. federal agencies. The news comes at the heels of the recent ransomware attack we reported on yesterday. President Joe Biden and Russian President Vladimir Putin recently held talks in which cybersecurity was also discussed. Meanwhile, Microsoft has asked Windows users to install an update. This is after a cybersecurity company inadvertently released information on how to exploit vulnerabilities in its operating system. The state of Missouri now leads the United States in new cases of COVID. Members of a new federal surge response team have arrived there to help suppress the outbreak. The U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, or CDC, reports that cases of COVID's Delta variant from India have risen dramatically in the country. In the 2 weeks ending on July 3rd, cases rose from 30% to 52%. The rise in cases has always led to an increase in death rates. Experts are saying that 5 emerging clusters are largely in parts of 8 states with low vaccination rates. These include areas of Georgia, Missouri, Texas, Alabama, Arkansas, Louisiana, Oklahoma, and Tennessee. They're made up of mostly smaller counties, but cities as well. The Biden administration is not issuing new restrictions in the wake of the surge, leaving that up to local authorities. The world has now crossed 4 million deaths due to the pandemic. Meanwhile, Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi has fired the country's health minister and 11 others as the country's COVID crisis continues. United States Democratic Congress member Hena plans to ask the CEOs of Exxon and other fossil fuel companies to testify before Congress. This will be in relation to their role in blocking congressional action to address the climate emergency. Hena is the chair of the House Oversight Subcommittee on the Environment. He made the request after Greenpeace UK released a video. It showed two lobbyists discussing Exxon's secretive efforts to fight climate initiatives in Washington. The video revealed how the oil giant supported a carbon tax to appear proactive about climate change while privately acknowledging it has no chance of passing. A neobank serving 12 million users has received numerous complaints in the last year of customers being shut out of their accounts. Chime is an app-based banking service. Its cash is handled by Bancorp Bank and Stride Bank, which are FDIC insured. But the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau says it has received 1,000 complaints about this service since April 15, 2020. This is from customers who have been locked out of their cash against their will. The company says it's cracking down on an extraordinary surge in fraudulent deposits. That's little consolation to customers. The issue also highlights the lack of regulation of neobanks. Chime built a base of 8 million customers between its launch in 2013 and 2020. This jumped to 12 million over the past year. Many of the new accounts began with deposits from federal stimulus payments, according to a recent analysis by Cornerstone and Strategy Corps. These are two financial service companies that specialize in consumer research. Chime's sudden growth has attracted the attention of venture capitalists in Silicon Valley as it's been valued at $14.5 billion. The company's CEO said that in late May that Chime might prepare to go public as early as this fall. The United States Security Council is set to discuss a major Ethiopian dam project amid strained ties. The meeting comes after Ethiopia informed downstream nations, Egypt and Sudan, that it has begun the second phase of filling the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam. On Tuesday, the United Nations called on the three countries to recommit to talks to avoid any unilateral action. Egypt and Sudan have been pushing Ethiopia to sign a binding deal over the filling and operation of the dam, which is located on the Blue Nile. Ethiopia's Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed's government, however, has said it will move ahead with filling the reservoir in the absence of a deal. The Arab League announced last month it was backing the UN Security Council intervention. This was despite Ethiopia's insistence that talks proceed under an ongoing process led by the African Union. Ethiopia says the multi-million-dollar dam is essential for the majority of its people to have access to electricity. Ethiopians contributed millions of dollars to the project by buying government bonds. The demand for Albanian herbs has been soaring due to the COVID pandemic. In 2020, Albania exported more than 14,000 tons of medicinal and aromatic herbs worth $59 million. About 95% are exported to the United States, Australia, New Zealand, France, Germany, and Italy. Herbs are believed to strengthen the immune system to fight infection. There has also been growing enthusiasm for natural and organic products. Albania has been one of Europe's top producers of medicinal herbs, mostly wild plants harvested in the foothills. Albania is a majority Muslim country, although its government declared it to be atheist during communist control from 1940s to the 1990s. Coming up next after our break is our in-depth analysis segment. So stay tuned and we'll be right back after these messages.
If I could be you, and you could be me for just 1 hour. If we could find a way to get inside each other's minds. Walk a mile in my shoes. Walk a mile in my shoes. Well, before you abuse, criticize, and accuse, walk a mile in my shoes.
Despite the development of a COVID-19 vaccine, millions around the world will not have access. We need a vaccine that's free and available to everyone, everywhere. It's time for a people's vaccine.
Welcome back. In our first analysis segment tonight, analyst Brian Concannon is joining Saliha Farouk for an insightful discussion on the assassination of Haitian president and the situation in Haiti. Over to you, Saliha.
Thank you very much. Today, we're so happy to be joined by Brian Concannon, who is a human rights lawyer as well as a foreign policy advocate and the founder of the Institute for Justice and Democracy in Haiti. Brian, thank you so much for your time today.
Well, thank you so much for having me.
Our pleasure. Now, sadly, the Haitian people are not completely unfamiliar when it comes to dealing with a presidential assassination. Just in 2015, one had led to the US, of course, invading Haiti at the time. How is the murder of President Jovenel Moïse in 2021 going to be any different?
Well, actually, the last murder of a Haitian president was in 1915. So it's been a long time since there's been a murder. What there have been is coups d'etats. There were coups d'etats in 1991 and 2004. So Haiti has a long history of political violence. And you're right that the challenge is how do we make things different than before? And the main ask from Haitian civil society is that everybody, actors in Haiti, but importantly, the international community, support the development of real democracy. One of the things that typically happens when there is a void in Haiti is that the international community rushes in to fill the breach, either by sending soldiers or by deciding who they think is the best person to lead Haiti out of the crisis. And in both options, the Haitian people are usually left out, and you end up a government that does not meet the Haitian people's needs, does not have broad popular legitimacy, and is therefore really doomed to failure. If speaking with Haitian activists the last couple of days, everybody's deeply worried and terrified, I think is a better way to put it. But they also do see an opportunity here. They think that Haiti can get back on track towards a stable, prosperous democracy, but it needs to be really given a chance. And the things that have failed before, we need to learn from that and not do those same things again.
Now, Haiti, of course, has had a very complicated relationship with the United States for more than a decade or so. Given this recent assassination of the Haitian president, how do you see the relationship between Haiti and the US becoming far more intertwined?
That's a very good characterization. The relationship with Haiti and the U.S. has been complicated for better and for worse. Both countries have contributed to the other countries' prosperity and governance, but also the United States has done several things that have not been helpful for Haiti's governance. One of the most recent unhelpful things, which is what gives rise to the current opportunity, is the fact that both the Trump and the Biden administrations had supported President Moïse even as he was dismantling Haiti's democracy. President Moïse refused to hold elections for the 4.5 years he was in office. That led to Parliament becoming totally dysfunctional. It led to all local elected official seats becoming vacant. President Moïse had a campaign against the courts. He illegally fired 3 Supreme Court justices in February. The head of the Supreme Court died of COVID last week, and so the Supreme Court has only half of its members and can't make quorum for some decisions. The police have been politicized by President Moïse, and gangs associated with the government have been involved in a 3-year pattern of attacks against government opponents, and that has led to hundreds of deaths, and has been classified by a report by Harvard Law School as crimes against humanity. Throughout this time, the U.S. has actually supported President Moise, which Haitians found deeply dismaying and deeply unhelpful. They see now that since President Moise is no longer around to support, they're hopeful that the United States will support, instead of a particular person, they'll support a process that brings in a transitional government that has broad support that can then have elections to create a legitimate government.
Thank you so much for that insight. Now, in the early part of the millennium, a lot of people do agree that Haiti might have been moving towards some kind of prosperity with, for example, the first elected president, as well as a peaceful handover of power. And of course, we cannot neglect the economic rise that they saw in approximately 2009. Why do you think that things have taken a turn for the worse since those years? And again, how might that affect the US, if at all?
There was some stability and development in Haiti from 2005 until 2009. If you go back a decade earlier, there's even more progress. Haiti had had a 9-year experiment with democracy where almost all of the systems functioned. You had the first 2 ever handovers of power from one elected government to another in 1996 and in 2001. And you had, along with that, you had increase in schools, increase in healthcare, increase in economic well-being. In 2004, the United States and the international community supported a coup d'etat that overthrew Haiti's elected government, and Haiti's really never recovered from that. As you mentioned, you had a few years of progress between 2006 and 2009, but that progress came to a halt really in 2011 when President Martelly, who was from the PHTK party, came into office. Since then, President Martelly and President Moise, who's also with the PHTK party, have really been trying to reverse Haiti's democratic gains, and again, with the international community support. What happened in 2004 was the United States didn't like Haiti's economic policies, and so we actually helped the overthrow of Haiti's government. And the United States, but the rest of the international community, needs to realize that we may have a sophisticated understanding of economics, but we can't impose our understanding on Haitian voters, that they need to have the freedom to choose their leaders. Whether it's good economic policy or not, what is important is that the government is legitimate and that they implement the policies that they're elected to do rather than the policies that the U.S. imposes.
Now, there has been so much analysis regarding this chaos and what might ensue on a diplomatic level, but there is something else in terms of another piece of the puzzle that people might not be looking at, which is, to what extent do you think that this political turmoil might impact the known gang violence in the region, as well as the humanitarian crisis in Haiti? So we're talking about people on the ground level. What do people need to know?
People in Haiti they're very worried that gang violence will increase, and they're worried that the humanitarian situation will continue to deteriorate. But it's important to note, in terms of the gang violence, I mean, there's a long history of the last 25 years of gang violence, but it has really spiked under the Moise administration, and in part it was because the government supported those gangs. It's going to be hard to decrease the gangs' powers, but certainly the international community can start by stopping the flow of guns, most of which come from the United States. We can also support Haiti's police and push the police, instead of to be doing the political work of the government, do the work of to follow their oath to really fight crime. That's not going to be easy. Again, the police are outgunned, but there are opportunities to start to make law enforcement response to the gang violence that hasn't happened. But it's also important to note that the gangs are really, the breeding ground for the gangs is the poverty in poor neighborhoods where government services are are woefully inadequate. And the only real way to stop gang violence in Haiti is to create a government that is legitimate, that is responsive to the people, and that is providing basic government services to the majority of Haitians.
The progress in Haiti has been characterized so differently depending on the administration of power in the United States. What do you foresee going forward with the Biden administration, just as we conclude today?
So Haitians were excited when President Biden was elected because he made a lot of promises about putting human rights at the forefront of his foreign policy. He's disappointed them in the last 6 months by supporting President Moise, but there's a real opportunity for President Biden to change course. He can follow the lead of the Haiti caucus in the U.S. House of Representatives, which made a statement saying we need to listen to Haitian voices. We need to install a legitimate government that has popular support. And I think that if it follows that lead, if the Biden administration follows the lead of the Haiti caucus, but more important, of Haitian civil society, it really can make an important contribution to democracy in Haiti.
We're speaking with Brian Concannon, who is a human rights lawyer as well as a foreign policy advocate and founder of the Institute for Justice and Democracy in Haiti. Brian, in light of the recent events that have happened in the region, thank you so much for your time and your insight today.
Well, thank you so much for covering Haiti.
Back to the news studio.
Thank you, Saleha and Mr. Concannon. Before moving on to our next analysis, let's take a quick break and we'll be right back after these messages.
Our fellow Americans.
Right now, the COVID-19 vaccines are available to millions of Americans.
And soon, they will be available to everyone.
The science is clear. These vaccines will protect you and those you love from this dangerous and deadly disease.
They could save your life.
So we urge you to get vaccinated when it's available to you.
That's the first step to ending the pandemic and moving our country forward. It's up to you.
They took over my bedroom. Come on, come on. Okay, Dad. 1, 2, 3. Dad! You saved me. Dad?
Are you okay?
I'm fine, dear.
Your hero needs you now, and AARP is here to help. Find the care guides you need at aarp.org/caregiving.
Welcome back. Best known for his work championing the rights of indigenous and marginalized people in the eastern Indian Jharkhand state, the death of Father Stan Swamy has shook the religious freedom rights community. To talk about his demise and the situation of religious freedom in India, Commissioner of the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom, Nadine Mianza, is joining Imam Abdul Malik Mujahid for a detailed conversation. Nadine now chairs USERF. Over to you, Imam Mujahid.
Thank you, Hena. Death of an Indian human rights fighter, Father Stan Swamy, has shaken some people around the world. United Nations spoke, European Union spoke, there is news around. But this continues to happen in India. Father Stan Swamy was an Indian priest who fought for the Dalits. Dalit is a term which hides what happens to people who are oppressed there. These are lowest of the lowest caste, are actually outcast. These are tribal people. Dravidian people who were conquered by Aryans several thousand years ago. Father Stan used to stand for them, fight for them. He spent all his life doing that. He was 84-year-old. But then he was arrested, detained without a trial by the Indian government, and despite requests for appeal for 84-year person who has Parkinson's, was denied, and he died. There are several hundred people who are simply detained, and they are human rights activists. United States Commission on International Religious Freedom has repeatedly spoken out, and they have criticized this barbaric act of putting an 84-year-old religious person in the prison without a bail, without a trial, and letting him die there. And to discuss that with us is no other than Nadine Mainza, chair and commissioner of the United States Commission on International Religious Freedom. Welcome to Muslim Network TV, Nadine.
Thank you so much for having me today.
Was Father Stan Swami ever convicted of any crime, or his crime remained just he stood up for the poor and the oppressed?
Exactly. He was never charged. He's not been charged with a crime. He had not been convicted of a crime, so he'd been held for 9 months without any trial or conviction. And really no evidence other than just an accusation that he was working with Maoist rebels, which there's no proof that he is denied, and that they've given no proof to. We immediately in October 2020, when he was arrested alongside 15 other activists and academics, he was charged under the Unlawful Activities Prevention Act, or the UAPA. And they, of course, accused him of ties with organizations that were instigating violence. So here he's being held in while COVID is rampant throughout the world at 84 years old. So we immediately, of course, as many other organizations and the United Nations and others came out and opposed and criticized his arrest. So what we saw is him. He has Parkinson's disease and was already in ill health. And several times they petitioned for him to be put on house arrest, and it was denied. In fact, I saw a heartbreaking photo of him in a hospital bed with chains around his ankles with an oxygen mask on. So this is an 84-year-old man who did not need to have chains in a bed as he was being held, simply because of the work he had done, being a voice for Dalits and other who don't have somebody advocating for them. And so, so these laws, so much of the time, whether they be this Unlawful Activities Prevention Act or, anti-conversion laws, so many of the times these laws that are instituted that we're seeing in India are actually just being used against people that the government wants to oppose, and it's used as an excuse to go after them. And so he maintained his innocence and had no links. And of course, in May, they appealed as he started getting sick, and again that was denied. He wasn't given bail, and just really, I guess, in July 5th, died July 5th, just after being in the hospital for a short time.
Are there other people who are in similar situation in India, Nadine?
We have some reports of people being arrested. It's hard to get real good information, but we certainly would welcome at the commission that they would have information like that to be able to share it with us, so that we could, speak into those situations before they get to be this grave.
Yourself has adopted him in some category of prisoner of conscience or something like that, or prisoners of religious freedom. What is that system, and why did you adopt him for that?
Yes, so we have a couple of systems. First of all, we are mandated by Congress to have a prisoners list. So we do keep track of all the prisoners. We're trying to, we just started assembling it. So we again would welcome information of prisoners who are being held because of religion or belief across the world. So we're keeping track of those. And then we also adopt prisoners of conscience, which gives us the opportunity to advocate on behalf of them for their release. Now, we only do that when the family, the lawyers, if possible, even the prisoner themselves have approved that kind of advocacy. Because obviously, in some countries, we do work behind the scenes. I was fortunate to be able to negotiate a prisoner release in a country that never went public because it would have hurt that particular prisoner. So it just depends on the situation, on how it works, but it just gives us an opportunity to speak out on behalf of those that do need their cases to be raised, hoping that will bring some relief for them and others that are in their similar situations.
So Father Stan's case, his family requested or he himself requested to be.
Yeah, I'm not sure if he was ever officially a prisoner of conscience for us, but we all spoke out about him pretty regularly because it was such a public case, and we were watching it very closely. So I think he actually got a little bit more attention than some of the others who have been more officially adopted into the system.
So the commission is about the religious freedom, but he was fighting not for the religious freedom, but he was fighting for the indigenous people who are oppressed, the caste system, which is more social category. So does the work of religious freedom include these type of activities?
They do when the religious framework is being used. We'll see this in Islamic law sometimes, that there'll be discrimination against particular communities, that they're using religious law to discriminate against them, whether it be women, LGBT, others. So then that would be a time that the commission would speak out because they're using religious law. So the caste system it is the same sort of thing in that they're using a religious framing to be able to discriminate and limit people's ability to practice their faith. And that gives us the opportunity to stay within our mandate and still speak out about these type of situations.
Which reminds in India, as you know, probably that a whole lot of human rights activists and many of the minority activists who are standing up for their rights or due process, they go to court, and court unfortunately denies them. For example, here's the person, Father Stan, who has Parkinson's, who's 84-year-old, and he's tied with a chain on his leg. So these type of brutal treatment, what yourself is doing to help India grow out of this brutality?
Yeah, so I think for USERF, one of our mandate really is to be an independent, as a watchdog to the U.S. government. So I think the most important role, while we have done a lot of advocacy that has drawn attention to the negative conditions in India, I think the most important role that USERF has is to make these recommendations to the U.S. government and to make the recommendations to our own government to use all possible tools they have to pressure India to support human rights and religious freedom. So, the U.S. government, they've been an important ally. There's a lot of programs they do together. There's a lot of important diplomacy that happens. And we want to make sure that religious freedom, human rights are at the table being discussed when they're talking about economic deals, when they're talking about joint diplomatic goals, that, the embassies, the ambassadors, that these all should be issues that should be heightened. So we're hopeful that our work has educated the U.S. government officially to the situation in India, and that we need to interrupt this trajectory. We have seen the last couple of years religious freedom conditions going in the wrong direction in India. We've seen the government continue to promote these Hindu nationalist policies. And what these have done, if they've created an environment where we're seeing this mob acting out with impunity, targeting minorities, you're seeing national government as well as state governments pass discriminatory laws and policies that are limiting the lawful activities of religious minorities and really going against the Constitution that is supposed to provide them these religious freedom rights. And of course, violent crackdown on dissent, which we're seeing this be part of, the arrest of activists who are not committing any violence, or accusing them of some crime that there's no proof to, and holding them in just detention for long periods of time. So we're hopeful the U.S. is now watching, and that these conversations hopefully are happening privately with the U.S. government and the Indian government.
Commissioner Mines, you as a chair of the USERF has been quoted asking the United States to hold the Indian government accountable on the death of his father Stan. What are the things United States could do to hold India accountable?
Well, we often recommend individual sanctions for lawmakers, for leaders in the government that are making these actual decisions to arrest people like this, to pass laws that are causing these kind of conditions. So I think having a deterrent against some of the bad actors in India would be useful. I think that we're hopeful, like I said, that at the highest levels in the U.S. government that this is being communicated. We did see that the Secretary of State did also tweet about this situation and how disappointed they were by hearing about his death. So that was after we had spoken out, but hopefully that, we know one of the things about USERP that is so unique and helpful is we're able to speak into situations very quickly. We know it takes a while for the US government to do so. So the fact that they spoke into it already shows you that they're paying attention. And if they were willing to tweet about the situation, I'm pretty sure that there are some private conversations happening as well.
Your USERP statement also says, and I quote, Father Stan Swami's death is a stark reminder of the egregious and ongoing persecution of India's religious minority communities. So it means this is not an isolated case, but it is happening all over. So could you elaborate what is happening to Indian religious minorities?
Right. So first of all, we have this environment that has been created by this BJP government that is hostile to religious minorities. So I think first of all, seeing the language that is being used to speak about religious minorities, the mob violence with impunity, that is a negative development. But we're also seeing laws that have been passed. The Citizenship Amendment Act passed in early 2020. That fast-tracked Indian citizenship to non-Muslims, in Afghanistan, Bangladesh, and Pakistan, who live in India, really sent a clear message about the way the government felt about Muslims. And of course, in conjunction with the proposed National Registry of Citizens, could require, could lead to state necessity and all sorts of horrible dehumanization of an entire group of people in the country. Assam is an example of some of the things there that they have done that we're afraid we'll see on a nationwide level with them implementing, the National Register of Citizens. So these are some of the things that we're most concerned about. The fact that a third of India has anti-conversion laws is also problematic. These laws do not do any good. It sounds like it's a way to, people aren't being forced to convert. What they're being used is it's to protect the majority faith from perceived threats, and they're really being used against people, false accusations, harassment, violence against often Muslims and others. And so, and of course, we're also seeing these anti-conversion laws that restrict interfaith marriage that have been introduced in 2 different states. So we're seeing lots of legal changes that are matching this mob violence and this societal environment. And the 2 of them together is really troubling.
So the one-sided the policies which prefer Hindus or other religious communities. You gave an example of the citizenship law, which allows different religious faith communities to be able to come into India, become citizens. But there are close to 60,000 Rohingyas who are already in India, who are being expelled because they're not Hindus, they're Muslims. Do issues like that are taken up by for the United States State Department directly with the Indian government?
Yes, we're very concerned about that. We have not been able to dialogue directly with the Indian government on these things. We have done a lot of public events and interviews like this and written material. But we are sure that the U.S. government is dialoguing. It's hard to know exactly what's being communicated. We're concerned about the Rohingyas that are there. We're concerned about in Assam, for instance. They have built large detention camps. Those sending a sign, we're hoping they won't be used for communities that they've accused of not meeting the threshold for the citizenship laws. So there's a lot that we're watching in India, and and we're concerned about. But we know that India has this beautiful history of multi-ethnic, multi-religious tolerance. So much of India doesn't meet this criteria. So to see the government pushing society this way, when in fact there are so many beautiful people in India that want to be able to practice their faith, want to have their neighbors be able to practice a different faith, and all live together peacefully. So, when we talk about these situations, I just want to make it really clear that, we're on the side of the people of India. We want them to be able to practice their faith, be able to be free, and to have the rights that the Universal Declaration of Human Rights has given them, to be able to follow their conscience.
This ideology which is controlling India is called Hindutva. But when I read the State Department report, it seems that they don't quite able to connect the dots that why it is happening. Why 84-year-old religious leader is tied with chains to his bed despite having Parkinson's. And other types of issues are happening, discriminatory laws, because of ideology of Hindutva. But why do you think there is growing awareness that there is ideology called Hindutva, or people simply don't want to use that term?
It's hard to know for sure. I know that, USCIRF has recommended that because of these egregious, ongoing, and systematic violations of religious freedom, that India, be listed as a country of particular concern, and also be sanctioned because of it, have some sort of consequence for these religious freedom violations. The U.S. government has not followed our recommendation. They've not put them on the special watch list or as a country of particular concern. So I'm not surprised that the report isn't as vigorous as we would have hoped, because that would force them to move quicker. And we know that while they're considering these violations, and we've seen that, like I mentioned, even in the recent tweet, it takes a while for the U.S. government to move, which is why it's important that individuals, contact their member of Congress, if they're concerned about this, that you highlight these stories on social media, that these instances are not able to go without notice. What we find so often is the U.S. will look away until they're forced to deal with difficult situations. And oftentimes we saw this in Turkey. Turkey invaded northeast Syria, and the U.S. is pretending that nothing's happening. In the meantime, the conditions there are very similar to the ISIS caliphate, or are very similar in terms of the atrocities, and it's taken a while to get the U.S. government to acknowledge that in fact there's a problem. So unfortunately, this is one of the reasons USCIRF was created with the 1998 Religious Freedom Act, in order to be that independent voice that forces the U.S. government to not look away. So while they may not be making the actions that we're recommending they do for India, they can't look away, because we and others are speaking out. We're documenting the truth, and we're having these type of conversations and making it very difficult for them to ignore the deteriorating conditions. And we're afraid that the consequence of this will be far, far worse conditions if there's not an interruption. So we hope that the Biden administration is taking this all seriously, that they're dialoguing, that they're coming up with some ideas on how to incentivize India to move back towards the pluralistic environment that they were for so many years.
Thank you so much, Nadine. Commissioner Manza is the chairperson of USCIRF. Thank you so much for your time.
Well, thank you so much. As always, I enjoy coming on your show, and I appreciate your commitment to highlighting these issues as well.
Back to you, Hena.
Thank you so much. That's all from our Washington studios tonight. Thank you for tuning in. You will find previous episodes and more on our YouTube and Facebook. For more content, keep watching Muslim Network TV or visit muslimnetwork.tv. Assalamu alaikum and good night.